This is a grief-stricken presentation, which I hope will also be brief, which rhymes. And I don't know if it can be brief because it seems to me like it's very quick. I made little bullet points. There aren't that many. And then when I started to try to talk before in a previous attempt, it just kept going. So let's see if I can avoid that. First, what about the events of session 7, which you do not get to see due to a recording error? So that's the grief. The events are as follows. As you may recall, our player characters and the two other characters with whom they had had a fraught interaction in a what appears to be some degree of tentative accord have all dropped in their tracks into a deep sleep. I am using the rules for the shaman dreaming. The characters may have suspected, but didn't actually observe that there are caves and chambers beneath this stony construct, and that in them, if they had looked, they would have found if Ethasha had gone down instead of up when she was wriggling through there in snake form, she would have seen that there was a dreaming diagram as discussed in the rules, um, and the skeleton of a snake, meaning that the shaman had ultimately died while dreaming. And I figured that the dream skill can just keep going. So that's my little adjustment to the rules. No mention of such things is there, but there are, if the shaman's spirit had been disconnected at the time, you can get there. Well, anyways, what is this about? I had already determined the nature of the dream, and the rules for it are kind of interesting in that in ordinary use, the player is conducts the skill, and then in doing so has to choose a color, has to choose the herbs, and has to choose the symbol. And I kind of lined them all up fairly straightforwardly. Green and star, so there's star anise, and there's the color green, and then there's the symbol of the star. And the reason is that it's all about strength, hope, victory, a little nod towards serenity. There's a whole bunch of kind of, typical occultist string of, oh, look, there's an adjective I like. Oh, how profound. Well, anyway, so I was able to look through those and, come up with this idea because I had a pretty good idea for the history of this edifice. Well, all that said, what kind of dream did they dream? They all dreamed, and I kind of like my dream presentation that we did, um, drawing on what it's like for me to dream. So it wasn't like a movie dream. There were no dwarfs, for example. Um, so Well, anyway, what happens in the dream is a reliving of the events from a couple of hundred years ago when the Empire had, or I keep saying the Empire, and everyone goes, oh, Star Wars, bad, and stuff like that. Well, who knows? You could say civilization if you wanted to. Um, but humans from the far parts who have been sort of slowly settling and utilizing, the river through these harsh lands, um, they aid the native dusters in ethnically cleansing the tribal humans who are there, with whom the native dusters have always had this kind of fraught back and forth relationship. And this was, a mighty battle involved, when we got to see, the mobilization of multiple duster tribes and the aid of the cavalry, um, and the main point being that this spot was where the Duster shamans had gathered together all the elements, all the elemental spirits, and had torn control of them away from the native people's shamans. So they were bereft of a great deal of their magic. They only had their ancestral spirits left, and um, the very land and elements were turned against them in the fight. So the interesting point going by the rules is that if the player comes up with all those symbols, then the game master comes up with the dream. And oh wait, is that the case? I think it's actually the player who comes up with the dream, and it's the game master who determines what the game effects will be. There's a whole list there. And I decided that since we were doing it with the game master stream, that the players we'll just flip it, and the players get to decide which of these effects will apply to them, and they're bonuses basically. They last for a day of different kinds. A couple of them are more qualitative, like feelings, and so I included those. They're on the list, and the players could choose whether instead of a bonus of some kind, they get imbued with some sort of feeling. Well, there was some very interesting things that they chose. Um, the sense of victory, the sense of power, and stuff like that certainly played into some of their choices. Um, Lorenzo chose for Ferrith a far more human friendly or identification with the human side of things. Um, Not with the native peoples, but with the cavalry. So they were kind of imbued with a sense of, if anything, justification. And that's very much the way that I had presented the dream, that this was a triumphant act. And so I had to sort of flip back into um, sort of playing characters mode and say, well, okay, what about my NPCs, Christos and Listas? What are they going to do? And so I just sort of said, all right, well, we'll go, two extremes. Listas is going to be all charged up with the fury and fire of victory. This is a big part of her people's history here and is going to experience that kind of frontier settler, we are here, we are part of the land, we have fertilized it with our soil, fertilized the soil with our blood, kind of thing. And she was all fired up. Whereas the foreign Christos, who had not grown up here, is the only one of them to have been suddenly shocked by the ethnic cleansing. That, yes, this is part of his history and part of his culture's history, but it's alarming to him to suddenly have to live and breathe, the reality of what is referred to or thought of as, if not, the great triumph of the people, but rather just part of the history that we all live with and do. Well, anyway, so he kind of underwent a bit of a breakdown on that, and it was sort of interesting. I had everybody, narrate their or discuss what they did when they woke up, and Christos was last, and I did that on the order of initiative actually, and they the I really wish that the recording were available. It was worthwhile, I think, in terms of the issues that this whole setting raises, to just see all the corners of reaction that everybody had in the aftermath of the dream. And one thing that I did then was make sure I knew where everyone was. That Helma, for example, had said that her first act had to go down and be to kind of wash a little bit in the water. And so at that point, of course, we rolled initiative again because that's when the hyenas set to. If I had paid attention and nobody had said, oh, and by the way, where are those hyenas? Wouldn't they be stirring? I mean, the sun's up. Remember, they slept a long time. There was uncontrolled sleep. I mean, they had not set up anything. They just dropped in their tracks and woke up when they woke up. It's morning. It's the sun is up, and the hyenas are ready to go. And so, especially because these particular hyenas are kind of crepuscular and ready to go at dawn, especially. Don't do much hunting at high noon or midnight. So anyway, sure enough, the hyenas move in, and I've got the big one, and I've got the several little ones, and we conducted the fight. A lot of interesting things during the fight. For one thing, a lot of wounding. The hyenas get in their licks. Now, one thing I was really focusing on was how the hyenas were very directed toward Listas. It's that same ongoing reminders that I've been giving all along the way. These hyenas are not really acting properly, and it's very clear at this point, finally, in this big group kind of situation, that why are the hyenas letting go after they bite someone and then turning toward Listas? So, Crixos again, Crixos fails to get his flame shield up, although we actually do see him try it this time, and they also position themselves tactically quite well so that they can't be surrounded. Um, Different people do different things. I found it kind of interesting that Vefselk took a more retiring view. She defended herself against a hyena and then scuttled away, still in Drake form. And then Ferrith, um, goes to help the other two, and directs the other, his Duster allies that we should do this. And Vefselk obviously disagrees, non-verbally, just through her actions. Ithasha does agree and traps the hyenas, or a group of them. She can't catch all of them due to the mechanics of the spell, but she's able to catch most of them in Entrap Enemy, one of her spells. Which again we've seen, her magic can be very, very effective. Um, she also gets her Earth Elemental going, who does a lot of damage too. So there's some, she's able to call the Earth against these hyenas. Now this is a very interesting situation thematically. I have already determined, this is a nexus point for all these elemental energies, and I was basically thinking of them as non-controlled. You need a shaman there to who knows what they're doing, and her use of the earth elemental is fine. She's very good at it, but the awakening, right, of elementals that she cannot control, non-summoned ones that are basically going to be slowly awakening the more and more magic shaman magic is used there. This is really kicking in. It's already happened a little, and now it's happening a lot. So they decide they better get out of there. So the basic, the shrine does not crumble into pieces. I mean, we don't have the whole rocks falling. There's a couple of rocks who fall, but basically the elementals start whipping up. The wind is howling through the rocks above. The ritual fire pit, which nobody had lit, is now like leaping up in vertical flames and all sorts of other things. And I can't say that the plan was to have elementals attack. That wasn't really it. But there would have been powerful elementals there available for interaction. And they're not necessarily reasonable beings, as written in the book. So it could have gone any which way, possibly quite badly. The characters, say, well, we really don't feel up to dealing with enormous elementals that can, blast mountains and stuff like that. So we're going to skedaddle. Have a nice sacred space. Elementals, we're on our way. So there have been some very interesting points. I think that the human characters continue to be more nuanced. At least a couple of the players are starting to say we are interested in their backstory. The hyenas were acting funny, and we are going back to the river, to the human areas, and we are going to go and negotiate with a half-duster there about these precious, valuable sands we're carrying. It's not like we're wandering off into the wilderness to go seek treasure. We've got something to do here, and clearly, human problems are underway. Okay, so that's what happened. Now, what about the previous session, session number 6, where I promised that I really wanted to talk about Crixos' crucial decision not to continue with hostilities. And it's often, difficult, if that's the right word, or rather it's of interest when you have non-player characters who make a critical decision. in terms of how everybody is interacting. And there are several points to bring up. One is that I typically do not do that unless and until it's clear that all the players have kicked it to that point where they are really literally saying, well, it's up to you regarding that particular character. Not up to me as GM in that role necessarily, but that's the effects, right? When the players are really said, all right, listen, we've gone as far as we're going to go. This is our position. This is where we're at. You've got options. What are you going to do? Now, I do that a lot as a player, so I'm familiar with saying, okay, it really is kicked to me now playing this character. And it had already been pointed out, Sam repeated it again at some point during this session, how much the players were realizing that you could flip the situation entirely. Listas and Crixos are very visibly, if you will, equivalents to player characters, and that they easily could see a situation where they were being the player characters, and that the Duster and Draver characters that we've got as our player characters would be somewhat threatening, mysterious, opinionated non-player characters in some sort of, you know, we're the humans and these, weird semi-demi-human, beings who care a lot about their sacred space. And we had no choice. We had to run into this spot to get away from the hyenas. Now we've pissed off these people who say that we're sitting on their holy rocks. So what are we going to do? So you can really flip it around and see what's happening with that. And so this is an important point, that Undiscovered has no rules at all for opinions and convincing. It has manipulations. There are ways to manipulate somebody's emotions through magic. There are ways to implant, false information. But there's no mechanics for interaction as such. This is of a piece, in my view, with Undiscovered's explicit instructions that the game is the game master's story. And it's got a beautiful statement, of course, that the players can do whatever they want. It's got some nice material about how addressing problems is very much up to the players using the broad range of their skills. And it also de emphasizes combat. Actually, if you will, it rewards it, but it rewards it in a small way with experience points for combat and violence, rewards in a big way for avoiding violence. So the game kind of leans in the way of the players have this wide range of nonviolent solutions if they only think about them. But again, the situations that they're in, how prior events turn into situations, the game, through a variety of positions and places in its text, very much favors the idea of, well, the game master has a story. And if the game master, just stays on their story pony, then the story proceeds, and that's how it's done. I don't like the story pony very much, and so I'm afraid that I'm being a bad Undiscovered game master and saying, I'm not going to say, well, then what will Crixos do that makes for the best story? That's nonsense. So instead, I said I am on the honor system. If I were playing Crixos as a player character, and if these were non-player characters, well, I'm obviously I'm going to look at the rules and not make a stupid decision. And there are a number of things that fed into this, and the decision that I made. One was the initiative order. The humans are slightly slower than the Dusters, and although one or two of them has had one or two, initiative outcomes that put them earlier than one or two of the Dusters, not in this moment. In the moment when Veselk had just spat venom at Listas. Now that was a bit of a berserk button, or potentially so, for Crixos. And so he had already gotten his flame shield spell going, which is defensive. It doesn't. It sets up a flame barrier, and it's up to you to walk through it if you want to. But it's still, a violent act. So he's putting up this flame barrier, and it hasn't hit yet. It's in process. Now, the rules for magic disruption are severe. If anything hits him, moves him violently, you know, distracts him in some extremely, intrusive way, then we have to go roll in the disruption table. So that's on the table, and all these people are acting before him. So I'm thinking, all right, we've got a potential disruption coming up if Listas had not been the target of Vesel's spit, for example. Then even a miss against Crixos would conceivably have disrupted his spell. I mean, spattering venom and all the rest of it. Well, so instead, the venom spit was directed at Listas and crucially missed. And I knew that if that attack roll had been successful, that Christos would have gone absolutely apeshit on all of them, and the flame barrier would have gone up, and he would have moved forward with the flame barrier moving with him and gone after them with his sword. So he would have been he wasn't a horrific opponent, but he was a worthy opponent as far as they're concerned, and he certainly would have gone after either Vefselk or Ithasha. So at this point, several things happened. I was playing Listas, who was absolutely aware of the situation. Well, if not absolutely, at least better aware than him, and was pleading with him not to fight. Ithasha did something critical at this moment, which was to put up her own defensive magic. Again, not attacking him, and therefore not disrupting his spell. Putting up her own defense, very, very much equivalent, actually. It was a sandstorm, kind of barrier around her. And critically, that sandstorm also was specifically placed to block Vefselk from further hostility. And Ithasha told Crixos, you have to stop talking. You have to stop fighting. So here I am. He's received 2 communications. Tactically speaking, he's in danger of having the spell disrupted because it's coming in late, which he now knows. And third, he can see that the most powerful being that he faces is not attacking him and has actually done an equivalent semi-defensive magical act that even prevents her own friend from continuing to attack without being harmed. So, from playing Crixos as a player character, I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to play him stupid. He's going to be smart. He's going to say, all right, we really are at an impasse. We've both got our defensive magics up, or mine is, ready to come up. And then he uses his action to stands down the spell that he was preparing. So, if I may say so in my defense, if there is a defense necessary, no, I did not choose Crixos to stand down so there wouldn't be a fight. There were 3 or 4 things that easily could have prompted him to go into full hostility and for Listas to back him up. And the 2 of them were dangerous. So they're ready to go on that, actually. And it was only really the confluence of 3 or 4 things that added together for me to make that decision as a game master, given that there were no mechanics available, no convince skill, no anything of the kind. Even if you go through all those interactive skills or performance skills like oratory and stuff, absolutely none of them have anything to do with convincing anyone of anything. So it is, when it's kicked to you, I think it's well considered to say, how do you proceed with the decision-making process so that you do not become story nanny. Okay, so that's what I had to say about that. My whole promise to be brief is completely scuttled at this point. So I will point out several system features that we have discovered. The remarkable power of magic in the game. We've talked a lot about the skill system is very intriguing and attractive. There's lots of things about the skill system that are very, very engaging. Your character works with their hands. Your character, there's a bodily feel to it, that your character can sing or your character can do these these things. You know, I'm good at glass blowing, that sort of thing, and the encouragement to use these cultural devices as your means of doing things, and particularly avoiding violence if you can. All of these are intriguing and fun. It is a little odd how much intensity the rules bring to very small increases. Okay, a 3% increase in this skill, and you're kind of like, well, I was 42%, now I'm 45%. Okay, it's not all that inspiring in the quantitative side. But the magic's range and effect, and now the players are, flipping through the rule book more and musing a little bit. Well, what if I had taken, what if I just want to be like a super fear and magic wind, mage kind of character? And if we'd started at 6th level with that, what would my character have looked like? And they're like, holy crap, I could do I got like 7 spells, and some of these spells are kind of wicked. So that's kind of cool. But we've been thinking a little bit about it. The term balance was brought up in our discussion. You see, that's what's a big part of the grief thing, is that we chatted over thinking about it. We reflected on the game we were playing in that very session. And to have lost that is very saddening. Kind of hoping that this or that player will chime in with what they can remember of that discussion and their further thoughts. Well, there you go. Session 7 of our Undiscovered Dusters game has been played and is lost to the ages as far as recording is concerned, hoping that we can recover as much as we can through discussion.